because of the declining revenues, which everybody out here knows about, but the declining revenues and the last couple of months' revenues have been significantly down, and the governor has brought the revenue estimate down for 2008, the remainder of 2008 through this the fiscal year ending in June, and then for fiscal year 2009, we're having to go back and do some work trying to get everything lined up to fit within that those budget or that those revenue estimates. So, wanted to have a chance to get the subcommittee back together and have some of the offices come in, some of the agencies come in. First on the agenda, we have the office of the governor, and we'll just give you all the opportunity to come up if there's anything you want to tell us about the process. I know that y'all have made the governor, we appreciate the governor having made some recommendations or give a cut list to that would bring both budgets based on what he's seen into line with the new revenue estimates. We appreciate that. So if you would come up and just tell us anything that you would want to tell us about that. There's nothing specifically. I don't have an agenda, for you, but there may be questions from the subcommittee. I'm going to turn. Let's see. I don't have you on there yet. There you go.
Thank you, Chairman. What I thought I would do is just walk through very briefly the tracking sheets and on just a few revised changes from the governor, and then just take any questions if that's all right. Pointing out first on page 16 of mine's reflecting page 16. Is that the same as yours? Okay. Page 16, line 25.0.1 is a reflection of just the reduction on the cost of living adjustment for personal services of $66,000. That affects the Office of the Governor. It's common change throughout the Office of the Governor and common throughout the budget as part of the Governor's recommendations to fund the $245 million reduction in the revenue estimate. Moving on down, you'll see also 25.2.1, Governor's Emergency Fund. The Governor has revised his recommendation to no longer request the $2.8 million for enhancing the Governor's Emergency Fund as it relates to natural potential drought disaster. That would be above and beyond the base of 3.4 that would stay in the base, according to these recommendations. Then moving on to page 17, lines 24.7.5 and 25.7.5 and 25.7.6. Two items in the Office of Consumer Affairs, both related to knowledge base. One is for the web-based enhancement of knowledge base for Office of Consumer Affairs and Customer Service, as well as ongoing maintenance, a total of $550,000. The Governor's revised his recommendations there as well. And I believe that is all as the Governor has revised his recommendations for the Office of the Governor. Happy to take any questions.
I do see a question. Chairman Calvin Hill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for the presentation. I do have a question that follows in general, if I'm reading this correctly, and I appreciate on 2501 where they're reducing the general salary increase from 2.5% to 2%, but I don't see that reflected in the other sections, such as on line 25.1.2 or 25.3.1 or 25.4.1, etc. And am I missing? Or is that's all rolled into one there? Okay. That explains it. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Chairman Hill. Any other questions? I want to make sure I understand the salary, the adjustment in the salary recommendations. It was a different. I can't remember now. Was there a different recommendation for teachers from other government employees in the original governor's recommendation?
There was for state employees, it was structured such that there was a 2.5% cost of living adjustment,
okay,
and a 1% performance increase
Okay.
on top of that, as well as a structure adjustment, and then a list of critical jobs, and that was the pay package for state employees, and for teachers that was a 3%.
3%. And although education isn't part of what this subcommittee reviews, tell me now, for the teachers, though, this new recommendation would have their salary increase at 2.5, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and the reason I ask you that, I don't know about the others, but I know my email inbox has been pretty well.
Oh, excuse me, I said 2. My mistake, 2.
2.
Yes.
I don't know. I probably meant that, but I think I said.
They started at
2.5.
2.5.
Okay, it had been 3.
I'm sorry, it started at 2.5. And
Originally though, it had been 3 for the teachers, 3% increase.
2.5. It started and then lowered to 2.
To 2.
My mistake.
Okay. I just know that my email inboxes have been filled with pretty much form letters, I think, from them. But I just wanted to ask you about that. Looks like we have a question from, is it Representative Chairman Mills?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I, as well as you, Mr. Chairman, have received numerous calls and emails and letters regarding the teacher's salary drop from 2.5 to 2%. And that is a concern, at least in the constituency that I represent. On the governor's emergency funds, 25.2.1, 2.8 million. When this was first presented to this subcommittee, I remember we spent some time talking about the governor's emergency fund, how the governor was only going to recommend issues that were for emergency, and we actually had some questions about how could, it's hard to anticipate emergencies, and we all understand that. And I guess, when you see all of a sudden you can come in here, a few weeks ago and make the case for 2.8 million, and now you come right back in here in an emergency fund, and then you come right back in here and it's leveled out at 0, it does make me question a little bit. I hope you can understand my logic here. I'm just trying to put 2 and 2 together. And can you help me a little bit? I heard you refer to because of the drought.
Sure.
Can you go a little bit further into that, and maybe it will help me?
Let me talk a little more generally about the governor's approach on the $245 million, and maybe that helps put this in context as well. As the governor looked at revenue estimates and saw that we were going to see, or very likely experience, less than expected growth in revenues, he tried to figure out what is the most equitable way to come up with recommendations or revised recommendations across the board. And as you know, with the state, the incremental growth in the budget in the state, there's a lot of non-discretionary growth, whether it be formula growth in education or other types of things. That very, very much limits in the incremental growth what's left for discretionary decisions. While certainly in an ideal world, if we had the revenues that were originally estimated, we would recommend this, knowing the issues with the drought and the water issues. We would say this is still a good recommendation. But given that we don't have $245 million, or we have $245 million projected less than we did before, we have to find the money somewhere else. So while we would still stand behind this as a strong recommendation given our situation, if we were to revise it and try to find money, it's all oftentimes the governor uses the phrase, there's good and there's also good. This is an also good recommendation. It's just that at the end of the day, we have to find and provide to you guys a balanced budget, and this is where we would end up making that recommendation. Now, does that mean that during the course of the year we won't end up with emergency needs related to the drought? No. But should we? That is something that we can't anticipate, and we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
To answer your question, Chair.
Well,
if you have a follow-up, go ahead.
There's not a perfect answer to your question,
Yeah,
and that's the nature of a flagging economy and
Right.
us trying to adjust with that.
I concede to the difficult situation
Sure.
you find yourself in. I'm not unrealistic about that. It's always hard to cut anywhere. It's always somebody. I understand. Could you take me to the part we were talking about the teachers? Where is that listed on here?
Well, it wouldn't be listed on here.
Would it be under the teacher? Would it show up in this document though somewhere else?
I'm not sure which document you have. I have an abbreviated version. It's just related to the Office of the Governor.
Tracking document. Okay.
And I wouldn't, and the chair wouldn't normally bring up the issue of the teachers. It's just I know that we've all probably been inundated by emails and probably calls pretty soon. I just wanted to, since we had this opportunity, to ask about it. But if you have further questions, go right ahead.
Well, where I was headed was I just wondered what the amount of the cut was.
The total amount?
Right.
I do not have that in front of me, but I can follow up and get you that number.
Okay, that's a good question. You're asking how much, if it between the 2.5 and the 2.
Exactly.
And you want it as it relates to teachers specifically?
Correct.
Okay. We'll get you that information.
That's a good question. Any other questions from members of the subcommittee? I wanted to ask a question about the emergencies. Now, if during the year when we're not in session and there is an emergency, God forbid, that would require, can the governor, and I know I'm on the Fiscal Affairs, Legislative Fiscal Affairs Committee, and I know there are certain things we do during the year, but as far as it relates to the reserve fund we have, can he use money from that for an emergency if he had to, or would it take the Fiscal Affairs
from the
Committee
revenue
come back
shortfall
in,
reserve?
Yeah.
I do not think he can.
Okay, I'm just curious.
Do you have a different impression? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just
there are
curious.
limited abilities other than calling back. It depends on the extent of the emergency, right? I mean, if it's a large emergency, then obviously it would probably involve the legislature.
Okay. Well, tell us how much. Now, tell us, and I know you've told us this before, but just so we'll know here, how much is in as we sit here right now. How much is in the governor's emergency fund right now?
In the middle of
with no further appropriations in the 2009, no further appropriations.
In the base, there's approximately $3.4 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. 3.3 million, you say?
3.4.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else you want to present to us? Any further adjustments or cuts that you all have identified since you put out the original cut sheet? Anything else we could look at?
No, sir.
Okay. I don't see any other questions. We appreciate very much you coming today. Thank you
so much.
Thank you for your hard work. Thank you all for coming today. We've asked the Secretary of State's office, the Office of Secretary of State, to come in. There's some cuts that were there we are. There were some cuts that were, and these further cuts recommended by the governor's office. We just wanted to give you all the opportunity, if you wanted to address those. Have anything you want to say to us about it? Page 31.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I think on y'all's tracking document, we start on page 31. I think the actual reductions that have been made in the revised budget are on actually page 32, at least in the document I have. And it's 41.5, and I think they deal primarily with the corporations area.
Asking is if you would just tell us how that might affect the operations.
Sure. Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I think, and y'all may or may not recall from previous hearings, we've talked briefly about what we've referred to as the corporate dissolution process. And what that is for our corporations division is an administrative process where we are required by law to basically maintain and update our corporate filing database of active companies. Unfortunately, the agency had not been doing that annually as it's been required to do, and probably had not done a full sweep of the process since 2003. We've identified about 280,000 companies that are in some form or another either behind in their filings, not current, in arrears, things of that nature. And there's a process that's structured both in the code as well as in our processes and procedures where we have to go through contacting the corporate filer, telling them that they're in arrears, what the process is, give them an opportunity to become current. If they do not become current, there's a process in which they are administratively dissolved. For the majority of these companies, they're most likely not in existence. But for our estimates, we're estimating that just under 70,000 companies will catch back up, if you will, and we're likely to see an impact on the revenue side, and this would go to the state revenues, of about $2.5 to $3 million. The reason the funding, which is in total about $150,000 for this process, is necessary is, as I said, there are several steps we have to go through in order for this to be done. It's done through the mail, which means the majority of the costs we're paying are in postage. And this really comes down to what would be kind of a critical area, almost a mandated area of how our corporations division is funded or operates or is supposed to operate. One other point I'll make, the corporate renewal process that goes on annually, it starts in January and ends April 1st, where we send out renewal notices and give companies the opportunity to either via paper in the mail or online renew their corporate filings, is also very postage intensive, even if it's just on the postcard side. Our office sees somewhere in the neighborhood of 75,000 to 80,000 pieces of mail returned for bad addresses. And the reason that's important here is if those bad addresses are no longer in existence and they're no longer in business, we're spending money every year on postage that is just going in one side, the Postal Service, and coming back on the other. This dissolution process allows us to basically clean up the file, and we won't be spending good money after bad on companies that we know from return postage aren't there anymore. And that's kind of one of the reasons for the annual process to do the dissolution. So I mention this again to the committee because that $150,000 that the governor has identified is a pretty critical area of our corporations division. And I'll mention one other area as well. There's a contract, it's 41.51 and 41.5.3, Office Automated Solutions Knowledge Base is what it's called on the line item here. What that practically means is that is our online filing and database management for our corporations division. That was a contract that was inherited by this administration, by the previous administration. Unfortunately, the previous administration in their last budget submittal did not include that funding in its proposal for fiscal year 2008. We've had to maintain that contract without the funding in place, which is why we requested the governor to kind of make that issue whole for us. Again, it's one of our critical functions in the corporations area that may or may not have an impact on how it functions if we can't find a way of making that funding work.
Questions? I wasn't watching. I'm not sure who was first. I'm going to go with Chairman Williams since he's right here beside him.
In regards to the trying to ascertain whether or not someone's still in business when mail returned and so forth, is there any system that you have as to try to find out if these people have just moved to keep from pay? I mean, I know it's a very difficult job to do, but I'm just wondering if there's a lot of people out there that do this deliberately to evade being caught and moved somewhere else, and how you could go about ascertaining that they are still in business.
Sure. I think on companies or individuals who've moved, the majority of them are captured through a couple of different ways. First, the NCOA, the National Change of Address, may follow them, and our system utilizes that. Secondly, for a lot of these corporations, or even if these are small companies, LLCs, things of that nature, they may have an accountant as a registered agent, things of that nature. At some point, we usually will get them in the renewal process at the beginning of the year if they haven't filed a change of address in between. Let's say let's say somebody is moved in tomorrow in March, and if they haven't filed a change of address, which they can do online, through our website, or send in a notice or whatever it may be. We most of the time we'll get them when the renewal process starts for the next following year. In this case, it would be 2009 in January. And then if we also will use the information in their filings as a way of trying to keep up with them and things of that nature.
Do you have any idea, estimate of how much revenue you're losing because of this situation?
I know the impact at this one time kind of, I'd say, bigger process, the positive impact is going to be probably, like I said, $2.5–3 million. From a practical standpoint on our renewal process, let's say, I think it's pretty easy to say that we're spending just on postage and printing alone $25,000, $30,000 a year on notices that are just going through the postal system and ending up back in our offices because they're no longer there.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Number 25, who is that? Chairman Mills. Representative James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. You didn't turn me on, Mr. Chair.
Okay. What's your number there?
25.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It appears that if this budget cut goes through as planned by the governor, it's going to cost the taxpayers of the state a considerable amount more than we're saving. If you were given an opportunity to redirect some money from other areas, would this benefit you any at all? Or I guess what I'm trying to ask you is, if you were able to select your cuts, could you do a better job than what has been recommended by the governor?
That's a good question, Representative. And I think our preference would always be, if there, and I'll just take a step back and say, and remind the committee, and I think you'll hear this later on today and in subsequent hearings as well, we had a budget direction from OPB for FY08 amended in fiscal year 09 to identify a 2% reduction on the front end with us anyway. And what they did was give us the opportunity to, in essence, ask for that 2% back in some other areas, which we did, and it's reflected in the budget document you have in front of you. I think, but to really to your point, if we're going to be given a budget direction to identify $250,000, $300,000 of funds that need to be, in essence, cut, our preference would always be for us to do it on our end and bring it to the committee or to the governor, whomever it may be, rather than have it just identified through looking at a budget document and saying, well, this is $80,000 and this is $100,000, trying to come up with the magic number that they've identified. I think we'd always prefer to do it from our administrative side and bring it to you guys for your consideration and thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we have another question, but I mean, you have the opportunity to do that. I haven't now. I'm looking through here real quickly. Is there something in here? Where is the line item where y'all where you had your recommendation, or not recommendation, but your 2% cut that you would have taken in the initial recommendation, or not recommendation, but when y'all made your request to the governor's office back before September? Which line item in here shows the 2% reduction that you would have preferred to have taken?
I don't. Thank you. Would that be identified in the? I don't know that we could identify it in the document in front of.
They were all in here, but okay.
In front of you.
Well, then what I was going to say, then you do have the opportunity for something you would rather for us to cut that same amount of money in your agency. I mean, you can certainly recommend that to us. I mean, that's what we're doing. We're setting the 2009 budget.
Sure,
and going through that process.
And I just wanted to say that in response to that question. And I think once these recommendations came out, we've done internal discussions, and we could certainly provide the committee with what our 2 cents would be on some of these things.
But it has to be pretty quickly, though.
We could probably have it to you by the end of the day today or tomorrow.
If you could have it to me by noon today, it'd be
okay.
Better. Okay.
And I think there's a couple. One of the areas the governor identified were 2 positions in the call center and corporations, which has is approximately about $80,000. And I think in light of the budget projections being lowered and things like that, that's a fair assessment. And I also want to make clear to the committee that we're not presenting or coming before you to say we can't identify anything and we shouldn't be cut at all or anything of that nature. It's more making sure that we're working with you guys and everybody to make sure that what's being proposed makes sense.
And I appreciate that. And the posture we're in right now, and of course the time frame is compressed now, trying to work with this. And here again, I understand the position that the governor is in, making the lowering the revenue estimates because revenue has fallen. So I'm not criticizing at all, but want to give you the opportunity, because when somebody asks me or any of us, well, are these cuts in the Secretary of State's office, for example? I mean, not just picking on you or any of these. Are you okay with these? And I said, well, I guess because I haven't heard anything. I don't have anything from the Secretary of State's office to indicate there's something they would rather cut, and about the same amount of money. And that's that's all I'm saying. If you got something you would rather, I mean, we can look at it. I'm not saying it would be changed, but I'd be glad for us to look at it. Though.
And we'll have that information to you by noon.
Okay.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, there's one other point I'd like to make, and Chairman Williams and I have talked about this as some of the legislation has worked. There are some bills working their way through the legislature right now that are asking particularly our licensing division to regulate or to take on a new industry to do the regulation for and things of that nature. Uh-huh. And the only reason I bring it up before this committee, and I'm going to tell everyone I talk to this, is if we're going to go down the road where we're establishing new licensing boards and new responsibilities for a licensing board, we have to make sure the funding is associated with it, because from our vantage point, it doesn't make sense to say, okay, well, we're going to have to identify $250,000 in reductions, and oh, by the way, we're going to license, just to pull one out of the air, 5,000 home inspectors, coming online within the next year or whatever it may be. So I throw that out there just so that the committee may consider that there are a couple of things hanging out there in the legislative process that are going to have an impact on our budget as well.
Thank you. I've got some questions. I think next was Chairman Mills. Did you have? Okay, Chairman Mills.
Mr. Chairman, you bring up an excellent point, and I just want to reemphasize that. I know as a committee member, I would welcome. This is the opportunity to share what you think the best cuts from your department's perspective. Not that you're necessarily disagreeing with the governor. That's just part of this open process. I would encourage you to do that because we all want to do what's in the best interest of the citizens. Sometimes we disagree, but in the end, we move forward together. The question I had is on the corporate administrative dissolution letters that are, and of course that's what I understand is at issue here, a large part of that being cut. Are those letters not already out? I'm trying to figure out if you're already halfway through this process and letters, have they already been sent to corporations?
The initial notices have been sent, but for us to go through the process, it gets strung out, if you will, over the course of several months, because there are time periods required in the law to allow the entity to respond back to the agency to say, no, don't, here's my check for $30 or $60 or $120 or whatever it may be. So what we've found ourselves in is we're kind of at a point of being halfway through the process, but not really being able to close the door and really, and let's face facts, I mean, human nature is what it is. That final notice that serves as the hammer saying, if you don't respond in 45 days, you're administratively dissolved, really is the big last step in this process in order to make it work. And our concern would be that with this funding kind of now being jeopardized, if you will, that we've kind of gotten halfway through the process and won't be able to finish it up, and then we'll be in the same posture we're in next year, requesting money from the governor in the budget process, and we'd have to start from scratch, frankly, because we'd lose the time lapse in between would probably be too great to actually make it work.
And you're making my exact point, which brought me to the question, is that we've already mailed notices out, so we have invested taxpayer dollars in notifying corporations that either may need to dissolve or either re-up. And now, if we cut this funding, there'll be no money to do the next step of the phase.
Sure.
we will have just wasted that money on that postage for that first initial notice. And that's my concern as I look at this. And I guess my next question is, this probably is no new problem. I mean, I assume we've had corporations on the books for years and years that have been out of business. And I just wonder what happens in the end to those corporations if there's never an official dissolution of the corporation. And let me just tell you what I'm thinking. Would it not be easier to just sort of change the law and dissolve them and spend that money on all the postage, or is that not?
Well, one of the things, it's a valid point, and with the chairman's indulgence, I'll go as far in addressing it as the committee will let me. There was a bill introduced by Representative Matt Ramsey that dealt with some of these corporations issues. One of those was to make some changes in the dissolution part of the code that would allow for a voluntary disillusionment initiated by the filer basically at any time during the course of the year without paying a penalty or a fee or a processing charge. And I think that is one of the small tweaks to this process that I think will make it easier for folks to keep current, because the way the code had been previously written, some of these dissolution issues you were charged a filing fee even if you were in essence going out of business, moving to another state, things of that nature. And to your point about this going on for years, it's absolutely frankly, the corporations division should have been doing this annually, and it should have been an annual standard operating procedure, which wouldn't have nearly this one-time $150,000 impact in the budget just to keep current and keep the filings going. It should be just like the annual renewal process and things like that. I think once we get over this hurdle and getting this first kind of run done, it'll become an SOP for our office, and we'll be able to do it in a way that really doesn't have the type of financial impact. Won't need to request, $150,000 in additional funding to do it. And also, it'll kind of change the culture, if you will, of how corporations are filing their papers with our offices, because it'll be another thing that they can check off if they need to do it. But we've identified companies that haven't paid their filing fees in 7 years, that with no repercussions, no impact on them doing business in the state or things like that, because frankly, there was no hammer hanging over their head to say, you really better do it this time. And hopefully, as we work through this, that'll all change.
Okay, thank you. I tell you, we're running a little bit late here. We got a question. I want to make sure everybody's question is they get a chance to ask the question. Chairman Mills, did that?
It does. Just one quick one. That is, when you got to cut your losses, you need to know what your losses are. And my question is, what are our losses in the process at this point? How much have we spent in the first initial mailing or the second? I don't know what we're at.
Sure. I don't know right off the top of my head, but what we'll do is we'll provide, I think the best thing we could do is provide a memo with our identified suggestions and kind of where we'd look to cut, and we could also identify some of the costs specifically to the dissolution process, so y'all have an idea of kind of where we are in the process. And we distribute that through Chairman Parsons, and like I said, we should be able to have that by noon today, if that's okay.
Thank you. I'm not sure who was next, so I'm going to go. I think it's the governor's floor leader, Representative Goley. I think. What's your number? 26. Okay, I've got the wrong one.
Thank you. I just wanted to very briefly, I appreciate your approach, Mr. Chairman, on when you're going through the difficulty and the pain of having to find additional cuts you didn't foresee. And while I've got, as you know, a special respect for the governor's discretion, his prerogative on budgetary matters, where you have an independent constitutional officer such as Secretary of State, Secretary Handel, I think they certainly deserve the benefit of the doubt in taking their best shot at finding the savings that need to be found, because they, above all, know how best to run their shop, just like we all know how to run our businesses best as opposed to somebody else. So I appreciate your giving deference to that and the benefit of the doubt to that office that I think she's earned. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Hill, you had your light on. I turned it off. Go ahead. If you'll hit it again there, the button.
Just wanted to comment on the remark you made about the licensure for people who were normally not governed by the state, and that was the inspectors. We have to make certain that we put enough money in this budget for the startup, because when they start regulating, they have to have programs set up for these people to come under, and it's very expensive. And I know the heat we catch at home when you all don't have the money to move forward in all of the testing and the education that's required to licensure these people.
Yes, ma'am. Just real briefly, we've worked with Chairman Williams on the legislation, and there is language in the legislation that makes, in essence, the implementation contingent on funding. And we've worked with all the parties and the stakeholders interested in it, whether it's the realtors or the home inspectors organizations themselves, and it's been great. And don't get me wrong, I think the legislation is a good bill. It's a good idea, probably something that should have been done or already being done. But I throw that out there from the standpoint of we're learning lessons the hard way through our experiences in the 5 years to get the contractors board up and running and functional. And we're very close to having eclipsed that hurdle, and again, thanks to Chairman Williams for his help in helping us navigate through that process. And truthfully, that's why keeping these funding considerations out there is important, because we don't need to keep creating similar situations as we go forward.
Thank you. So I think Representative James, or no, number 24, who is that? Oh, okay. Okay. Chairman Williams, you mentioned his name and he woke up, so.
Got carried away. I just make this comment, and I appreciate what the governor's floor leader said. And I think this conversation with you today has kind of turned on the light bulb with me, where you're closest to what goes on in your operation. And I know you come before us with a request, and sometimes I know you're probably not happy with the governor's recommendations. I'd like to see it opened up, and I hope the governor would be amenable to the fact that if you've got a budget and live within that total framework, that if there's things within that budget that you would like to see changed to do a better job somewhere else, that when you come before the subcommittees, that maybe you make that recommendation. I think that's part of our job, and I think it would open up the process to make you more efficient, and the governor would be pleased as long as you didn't exceed his budget request. So just want to make that comment that appreciate what you've done today.
Thank you, Chairman Williams. I don't see any further questions. We appreciate you coming. If you could, if you can get that information to us, we would appreciate it. We'll do everything we can to help.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We have we've asked DNR to come in. Our budget analyst isn't here, but we'll certainly try to make it through without him. We have Ms. Flashman up here to assist. And here again, we just asked you to come in to because we have this new issue with the lowered revenue estimates, and I think in your budget, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's the reason I asked you to come in. There were some changes, I think, and that's what
yes,
we wanted
Mr.
to see if there's anything you wanted to address with us.
Okay, and as usual, I will handle all of the divisions of the Department of Natural Resources other than EPD, and Assistant Director Usry is here to do the EPD portion of that. We do have one change, Mr. Chairman, that's reflected in 3 different spots in our budget, and I'm going to be at page 22, and we're going to start with 32, area 32. Okay. And all of the changes are in the same area. We, the governor, reduced the request that we had for vehicles in our division, and those vehicles show up in 3 different, or in our agency, and those vehicles show up in 3 different places. The first place is in the Coastal Resources Division. you'll see there was $5,860 that was reduced there. And then over in the Parks, Recreation, and Historic Sites Division, $60,000. And then finally, on page 24 in the Wildlife Resources Division, $400,000. And that was all of the vehicles that the governor had originally put in our 09 request.
Okay.
Is there any questions?
Any questions from subcommittee members? Do you have a question? I think it's Chairman Mills.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize.
No, don't apologize. That's exactly what we're here for, to ask questions.
We're all busy. It's hard sometimes to get opportunity to ask these questions. I have received numerous phone calls about the new licensing procedure that the department has made in regards to hunting and fishing. And I just wonder if you could tell us a little bit briefly about, if the chairman doesn't mind, about how that came about, because our constituents are really, at least mine are, they're very concerned. I know it's just a couple of dollars, but it puts us in the position of saying, well, we didn't do anything to make that come about. And they say, well, what do we elect you for? You're supposed to represent us. And so on behalf of my constituency today, I need to express that to you, that they're real concerned about it. They're upset about it. I've got small convenience store owners who are upset because they'll no longer be able to sell licenses, hunting and fishing. And can you just explain a little bit?
Sure, I'll be glad to. We have a licensing system currently that is quite antiquated. The system we currently have is what is called a store and forward system, and that means when we sell a license, or when a vendor sells a license, that information in that machine is stored for about a week, and at a specified period of time on the weekends, the machine comes alive, and that information is transferred to our licensing unit out at Social Circle, and we update the program and all that put into our database. The system is quite old. The machines are no longer made. We are servicing the machines ourselves in order to try to keep as many of them alive as possible, but we, on average, lose about 20 machines a month, which means 20 license dealers lose the ability to sell licenses every month. On top of that, we also are way past the contract with Hewlett-Packard to service the software component of that, and each year we pay what I think is an exorbitant price just to keep the system alive for as long as it will stay alive, which is very limited at this point in time. Currently, our licensed buyers are not seeing service delivery problems on the front end. Very, very soon they will be, because of the numbers of these dealers that are dropping off because of the antiquated machinery. We recognized that issue some time back, and it's not been a secret with a lot of the folks that have generated some of the letters and information that you've seen, that we have a very antiquated system. The problem is to replace that system with a web-based system, which gives us the ability to do some of the things that the federal entities have mandated and y'all have mandated, such as not selling licenses to deadbeat dads, and the violator compact legislation that we have with cooperating states dictates that we need to not sell that license in the first place. So to do that, we need a web-based system, a live web-based system. That 4 years ago, when I first became commissioner, those costs would have been $6 to $7 million simply for the ability to sell hunting and fishing licenses, not counting boat registration. We believe today, and this contract that we're entering into, which I think is a good one, is not only license sales but also boat registration and one-stop shopping for anybody, whether they're wanting to rent a cabin in a state park, a golf tee time, register a boat, or buy a license. That system today, we think, would cost between $12 and $15 million. Maybe as little as 10. It's a little bit difficult to predict, but we think the licensing component would be about 8, and then up to $3 to $4 million for the hardware for the registration of boats. So it's a sizable investment. Now, the legislature back in 1995 gave the Department of Natural Resources the initial ability to charge a service or convenience fee. That was amended in 2001, long before this issue came up, to include not only hunting and fishing license, but both boating registration as well. So the delivery mechanism for the state of Georgia charging a service delivery fee goes back into the mid-90s. We had, up until about 18 months ago, the ability to do telephone sales through, I believe it was Bass Pro Shops at that time, and Bass Pro Shops did telephone sales for a number of states around the country. They've gotten out of that business. We were the last state that they still serviced a telephone license sale, and at that time, if you wanted to pick up a telephone, buy a license over the phone, you could do that through them, and it cost you a service delivery fee of $3.90. So this system has been in place up in, at least with the telephone side of it, up until about a year or 18 months ago. We, in this contract, that same fee will be $4 as opposed to $3.90. So we capitalize on existing legislation, the fact that we've done this in the past, to try to provide a service to the taxpayers of this state, both hunters and fishermen and non-hunters and fishermen, that we think is cost effective. Trying to buy a hardware system that will be antiquated before the payoff, if, for instance, you did a general obligation bond, I don't think is good business sense in my mind, particularly in light of some of the needs that we have for other issues in our department, and, for instance, the vehicles that we just talked about. I had spoken with some of the leadership with both the Senate and the House previous to this issue, and quite candidly told them if I had $8 million, I'd much rather put that into vehicles than I would into a licensing system. Now, will there be an impact? There could be an impact on some numbers of licensed dealers. We have an exorbitant number of licensed dealers in this state, over 1,000. Only about 20% of those dealers actually sell over 80% of the licenses that are transacted. For many, this is simply a lost leader to get people into the store. We recognize that's important for some of these small rural areas. We feel like by continuing to give these licensed dealers that are currently in the system proprietary, if you will allow me to use that word, but proprietary delivery of our popular hunting and fishing guides, those can be advertised as those are available in this mom and pop bait store or hunting and fishing store throughout rural Georgia as that leader to get people into the store. But I think this makes extremely good business sense for the taxpayers of the state.
Well, thank you for your explanation, and I mean you're helping me understand a side that I don't understand and don't know. I guess I have quite a few more questions,
Sure.
and I won't bog down here now, Mr. Chairman, with all that. But I would like to just, the Bass Pro decision, folks going in there, that's a consumer choice. That's the difference I see in the fee. Consumer makes a decision to go get it there, so they're willing to pay that extra. This is a government decision that's been made by a government agency where the taxpayers have no choice, and the fee will be increased. And so there's a little bit of difference there in my mind. I guess I understand you had contemplated asking for a budget increase, but you thought $8 million was just too much, and that you saw this coming years back because you said you've been losing 20 a year approximately, and I just had hoped and would hope that it could be resolved some other way. I mean, frankly, as a legislator, it makes me wonder, maybe we don't need that language in the law. If agency heads can just raise fees and us take the brunt of it, and basically an agency head, and I understand you're trying to do the job under your best ability. I don't mean that to be negative or critical. I'm just trying to get you to see our side of it as well. We take the brunt of the increase, and then we say we had nothing to do with it, and then they say, what did we elect you for? And so there's the complexity of the situation. And I'd love to meet with you later.
I'll be glad to do that, sir.
Thank Thank you, Chairman Mills. We have a question from Representative James.
Just quickly, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Are you saying that when you increase fees, you could take that money and do what you want to do, or does it go back in the general fund?
These fees will be going to the contractor, the successful contractor, and it was bid in consultation with DOES and the Georgia Technology Authority to make sure we had both the contract right and the technical aspects of it right, working with our folks. These fees, the cost of this new system to the taxpayers of this state is zero. So for this $8 to $15 million system, the taxpayers of this state are not paying a penny. The transaction fee that will be charged for the users will go to the entity that was a successful vendor, which is a group called Central Bank / Infospherics. Central Bank is out of Missouri. Infospherics, who presently does our outsourcing of state parks, is out of Maryland. The transaction fee will go to them to recoup their upfront cost for providing the mechanism for our service delivery.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative James. We have a question. I'm not sure who. Representative Houston.
I hate to disagree with you, not costing the citizens of Georgia something, because in economic development it is costing us. Because a lot of us have small bait and tackle shops who boost the economy and employ people, and then outsourcing. I don't know if we have a bank in Georgia that could handle it, but you know, when we do economic development in Georgia, we pay millions for it, and it is costing us to do business outside the state, and it's costing us for these mom and pop operations, because when you come in to buy your hunting and fishing license, you buy other things, and we get more sales tax revenue the more people spend money in Georgia. That's just my opinion.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
I understand that argument.
Thank you, Representative Houston. I don't see any further questions right now. Do you have the Deputy Director of EPD here? Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you for coming, Commissioner. We appreciate it. And I believe we'd ask you to come, EPD to come, because of, I think there was one change that was made from the governor's new recommendations related to EPD. I think it was some real estate, the office space or something.
I didn't see a change for EPD
you didn't
in
know
the
you were losing.
governor's recommendation. Maybe I missed it, but as I look at it, the only additional funds that we'd ask for is for our Brunswick building, and it looks like that is still in the governor's revised.
Okay, I mistakenly. Okay. Well, then I don't see. I apologize for you waiting all that time, but did want to give you the opportunity to come in if there's anything you wanted to say to us, or if there's any questions from members of the subcommittee. I don't see any. Thank you for coming. I apologize for you having to sit there that time. There is a question. There, if you'll wait just 1 second. I was a little slow on the draw there. I'm just kidding. Representative Houston.
We're trying to make cuts everywhere. I just got out of education, and they're having to make terrible cuts and things that are really hurting. Why is this 600, is it the building over in Brunswick, why do we need that right now? Can you explain that?
Yes, ma'am. Excuse me. Our folks down in our Brunswick region have been housed in a building with a DNR, the Coastal Resources Division there. They have outgrown that area, and there were some other problems with that building. And so it was considered to be more economical and to make more organizational sense to have EPD move into their own building. And this is a building that we would be leasing, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
I don't see any further questions now. Thank you. Okay, we do have Department of Revenue, and I see the Commissioner here. Thank you for coming today. Page 29. Commissioner, just want to give you the opportunity to come in. I believe there's some changes in the governor's new recommendations. I want to give you an opportunity to come in and address them if you'd like to, or see if there are any questions from the
Sure.
subcommittee.
The two principal changes in the governor's most recent recommendation, the first is item 40.0.6 in the first section of common changes, and that's a further reduction in the new digital license plate rollout by $323,000. you can see that in the first iteration, when we talked to the governor back in the fall, we thought that program would cost us $4 million. He originally recommended the $3.3 million, and now has reduced it to $2.9 million. And then the other major changes in homeowner tax relief grants of $10 million. I think that's a combination of the slowing in the housing market and a change in forecast in the new homesteads, as well as we this year have used the state's chief economist, Ken Hegney, to try to help determine what the right and best estimate for the total grant needed for the year would be. Additionally, every year we have $2 to $3 million of HTRG grants that aren't claimed by respective jurisdictions by June 30th of the current year. So all those three factors combined give us some comfort that we can reduce that HTRG by $10 million and still meet the obligations the department's going to have during the year. And I think those are the two changes.
Okay. Thank you. Just one sec. Any questions from subcommittee members? I wanted to ask you about a couple of things I had here. The license tag on page 2940.0.6. Your agency's original request was for $4 million. The governor's first recommendation was for 3.2. Then this latest is 2.9. What does that, as far as the it says it's provide funding to ensure proper inventory of motor vehicle tags and registration cards and to implement the digital plate manufacturing technology. So what does that reduction do as far as the getting that implemented?
The 300,000 reduction?
Yes.
Yeah. That will just continue to put the burden on us to manage inventory even better than we think we'll be able to do with a digital platform. In the current heavy metal, heavy aluminum embossed tag platform, we have the manufacturing cycle and the distribution cycle to get those tags to the county requires to carry a lot more inventory and requires the counties to carry more inventory to make sure they don't ever run out.
Right.
This new program will allow us to speed that manufacturing process, offer better design. It uses less metal than the others. Than the existing system. It will just put a greater burden on us to not carry any more inventory than necessary. It's a forced efficiency into our manufacturing process and our availability process for the tags.
What's the lifespan now? How often are our tags, the actual physical tags, replaced?
Well, unfortunately, we're not on a consistent pattern for replacing. The tag that's on my vehicle is probably 10 years old at least. Years ago, from my understanding of the history, we would go through a spike every 5 to 8 years and replace tags statewide. What the governor and I have talked about doing is doing a rolling replacement of tags, and we currently are having people either when they get a new car and they don't have a tag they're transferring over, to get a new tag you just have to request it and buy it at that point. Part of the reason for that is when motor vehicle came back to the Department of Revenue in 2005, there were 2.5 million pre-manufactured tags in the warehouse in Conyers, and we spent the last 2.5 years bleeding that inventory down. And now to do it, and the subtle changes we're doing to tag design now is designed so that those tags will stay on the market for at least 5 to 8 years. Okay. So it's more of a policy now than a set standard under law.
Well, how much of we do have a question. I always like to go to the members, but so I can continue this line of thought just for a second. Now, of this $3 million, how much of it is of that money? How much is actually going toward the implementation of the digital plate manufacturing technology?
That $3 million is our cost to buy the plates from correctional industries and to run the program, i.e. the inventory control, the distribution to the counties. The correctional industries is actually buying the technology to do the manufacturing on their side, and that comes out of their budget with no state funds. It comes out of their surplus. The advantage they're getting from that is, one, they'll be training prisoners to use more technology. Hopefully it's a transferable skill set that when they do get out, they'll have something better they can do than just emboss license plates on one side. Plus, we're trying to move more and more of our form printing over to correctional industries. Right now we have over 3 million forms that we print a year that they are not doing for us, that they can do for us with the right equipment. And the last estimate on that equipment is only going to cost them $300,000 to $400,000 to take on a 3 million form production environment. Well, they'll be better off financially, and we will too, rather than having to buy for-profit forms from companies in Chicago and other places around this country.
Okay. I'm just wondering, I mean, isn't that something that could actually, I mean, if you put that off 1 year, what would the effect of that be? If you just, instead of this money going in this year and it was just, that whole thing was put off another year, what would be the effect of that?
Well, the attributes of the digital plate design are, it's an enhancement for law enforcement, your ability to read it. And also, I'm not necessarily a fan of red light cameras or toll plaza cameras. I'm just not, but it does enhance that you get an accurate image on both of those type applications. Okay. It will have an inventory effect. Yeah, could it be put off? It could. The tag business model itself, as was in our original budget presentation, the governor, I think we provided it to you all in an earlier presentation. We can provide it to you again. The tag business alone does produce over $210 million a year. And so our feeling is that when you put the whole model together, a $3 million expense to take us to another level of efficiency and delivery with with the specially designed requests that we get, it's a worthwhile investment.
Okay, thank you. Now I have another question, but I think Representative Hill has a question.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay, then my next question is on page 30, and it relates to line 40.10.4. The $1.2 million for the ongoing maintenance, support, and development costs for the multi-year data warehouse. What that was your initial request of the governor. That was his initial recommendation. That hasn't been changed. But could you just maybe briefly explain what the need for that is?
Well, a tax data warehouse would allow the department to consolidate publicly available information for our agents to access and use. And the type of information I'm talking about are the Department of Labor data, Secretary of State data on companies and registered agents and principal corporate officers, information from Dun & Bradstreet. And what that allows us to do is to continue the transition. We're trying to transition the department from a geographic service delivery model to an enterprise service delivery model. And what I mean by that is there are cases in the last year where we thought we initially started after a vendor operating in the Savannah airport that had over $1 million tax delinquency. I started getting phone calls from a guy in Atlanta wanting to talk about the Savannah airport, and I was like, how does the guy in Atlanta get the Savannah airport contract? And before it was over with, we found out that same person owed us money as operating from the Atlanta airport and 3 different businesses there. So what happened is we ended up having 4 different teams of agents pursuing, in essence, the same taxpayer. Having a data warehouse and being able to consolidate and capture information would allow one team to do due diligence and pursue that taxpayer and resolve that case rather than having as many as 16 to 20 agents working with different enterprises. That's the need for a data warehouse, and it's a technology that's used in many other states and the IRS today.
Thank you. We have a question.
Excuse me, and just in the following, the end of the model is that, you can see that we didn't come asking for more money and people as it related to just keep doing things the old-fashioned way. And with enough time, you get to this guy that's operating in these airports, but there's a whole other list of non-compliant taxpayers we're not engaging. And if you go to our website, you will see 1,500 pages of tax liens. in taxpayers with delinquencies to the state for over $1 billion. It's just a matter of how fast we can get to people.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your answer. There are some questions. I think Chairman Hill, did you have a question? Chairman Mills. You're on 24, is that right? Okay.
I may not look it, but I know.
25 is on. I don't know. Oh, okay. James there. Okay. Go ahead.
Commissioner, good to see you again. Thanks for coming. Just a question about 40.3.1 on page 29, the home owner tax relief grants. And I understand that what I heard you say was the economists have looked at it, you're anticipating a lot less growth due to the economy. What would happen in a scenario of maybe a turnaround, and let's say we grew at 3%?
Well, I'm gonna it's parsing, but we're the principal driver of the original estimate. This is the first year ever we've asked for Ken Hagney's input into that calculation. So, if it ends up being wrong, it's on us, not on him. So we didn't turn the responsibility over to him. Okay. I don't know, Chris. Do you know if by zeroing that out totally, does that allow for no growth?
Correct.
Okay. Last year, as I said, we had roughly $3 million that went unclaimed at June 30th, and so that money comes out of the current year budget when that happens. If it were to happen at 3%, we might come up short, but we generally have an idea of that when we get through the amended budget process, as we did have to do a couple of years ago when we missed it. But part of the drive on missing it back then were the special districts that were allowed to be created for fire districts, and I think some of you who were there at the time can remember that the Marietta Cemetery took $1.5 million worth of homestead relief grant back when the local communities could create these special districts for fire and other things. So, but that legislation was passed to stop that kind of activity. So, we might have to come back. And the reason we'll have a better idea then too is tax bills going out in the summer and early fall. Generally, they're paid in December, and so by this time of year, we'll know whether or not we're tracking or not to make it.
I understand it's the best educated guess, and I would tend to agree that market being what it is, I tend to agree. I think it's a good educated guess, and it is just that, a guess. What happened in, for example, like last year, and what would happen if we got to the end of this year and there's extra money left that we don't grant? Let's say it grows at a negative rate. Let's hope not. But what does that go back into the general?
It lapses. The department can't touch it, can't use it for anything.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Chairman Mills. I think next was Representative James.
I pass.
You pass? Okay. 29, Representative Houston.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, and I appreciate the job y'all are doing. And I had asked some questions about the convenience stores auditors, and I got those figures, and I just want to applaud y'all on what y'all are doing for your staff. And the figures that we were just zeroing on sales tax for convenience stores, and I understand there are 3 auditors. There's one for convenience stores. There's one in Macon, one in Augusta, and one in Atlanta that are trying to track these convenience stores. And in 2007, these 3 auditors, based on the audit, the penalties and interest collected $426,000. These 3. Well, do you think that over the next few months we could look at this and see if we had more auditors just focusing? I'm not just going after convenience stores. I don't. That was brought to my attention by my local constituents. That they would pay for themselves. If 3 auditors brought in over $400,000, how much would 10 bring in? And I'm not trying to target any group of people, but this is on sales tax.
Yeah, on general, a trained auditor, trained revenue agent, with the size Georgia has become, given the size the department is, they'll all produce, on average, at least $1 million of revenue a year, because it goes beyond the universe of people who try to do the responsible thing and file their returns timely or with extensions, which is perfectly acceptable. But it's just like having enough DNR agents or enough state troopers. Some people you just have to engage and spend time with to resolve their issue. So the answer is, before you hit that satiable return point, we could easily employ 100 agents. It would take us a while to train them all. We couldn't do it all in 1 year, but they would stay fully busy and fully occupied with, there's 1 million past due accounts. And those are the ones we've identified. And you're talking about ones we haven't even identified.
Yeah,
typically.
These are the ones that you just audited. But we've grown 1 million people in the past 10 years almost in this state. But how many more? And so that means more. And please don't think I'm picking on convenience stores. That, like I said, that's what my. It looks like we don't need to be paying more. We don't need to be putting more taxes on people if we're not collecting the sales tax that we already have. Just like this thing for the roads and everything. I'm not speaking against the road tax and everything, but if we've got taxes out here that people are paying and it's not being collected, we don't need to put more taxes on it.
I'm 100% with you. It's a three-dimensional view of the world. I mean, there's some conversation about digital cigarette stamp technology and $3 to $4 million for that. The first ask was $7 to $9 million. Once we engaged in the debate, well, they changed the number to $3 to $4 million. With $3 to $4 million chasing sales tax or known income tax, we could collect $70 to $100 million of what's known liability, much less the unknown. We continue to review our audit process, procedures, the selection criteria, and we also have issues with judges in some cases.
This was just on audits that you collect.
Right. In the legislation you sponsored a couple of years ago, we've got a judge in the central part of the state is now pontificating from the bench in a case that we have before him that sales tax evasion shouldn't be a felony in Georgia. And so we're combating that as we speak. So I'm fully support wherever you are.
I'm not trying to go against the judge, but I think that didn't we pass a law that
yes, ma'am, you did
on sales tax?
And we've reminded him of that as diplomatic as we could, but with the case in process, we're trying not to.
Well, I'm not. Please don't think I'm going to take on a Superior Court judge. I'm not.
Oh, I know. I just think it's relevant to the tax policy issue of if everybody is going to be held accountable and needs to carry their share of the load, then you have to have a standardized base platform that everybody understands the expectations they should meet.
Well, and one reason we're zeroing in on the convenience stores in my district that they weren't closing the cash register when they charged beer, and they were charging sales tax on lottery tickets and a lot of little things like that. And I appreciate y'all, trying to get that straightened out. But is it true that the state of Florida has more auditors in Georgia than we do in Atlanta?
That's correct.
I hope that's something we can work with you about the auditing process and let people understand how they're supposed to pay.
And y'all have been helping us with out-of-state auditors. Until 2 years ago, we didn't have any out-of-state auditors at all. And we now have some engaged, and the results they're producing are easily over $1 million each a year. And that's just getting to companies that generally take the attitude that, well, I'm good till I get caught. And there had been a known practice in the department, and it matters because tax consultants help all of these companies, that under first-time audit, there'd always be penalty relief. Well, we don't do that anymore if it's the same corporate group that should have known better, like an auto dealership group that operates over multi-states or within Georgia. Each dealership doesn't get first audit waiver of penalty. If the dealer group should have known better at that point and passed the word around within their organization, we quit waiving penalties in cases like that.
And I don't want to just think like I'm going after somebody. I don't want to do that. But I say that you might need some more help, and please don't come. I hate to ask us if you need more help because it's.
Thank you, Representative Houston.
Chairman Parsons, if I could offer one other thing too, I think some of you may have seen. I think it aired back in January, where one of the local media outlets was also looking into video poker, operating in these convenience stores where back rooms. And the essence of it is not a direct impact on sales tax other than the fact that it probably is a taxable transaction, but using the GBI and department data from an investigation that was done in 2001, given the estimated number of machines in the state at the time versus what we see in the state today, I think we can easily justify that over $500 million a year is going through these video poker operations. It's going untaxed from an income tax basis and a sales tax basis. And if that's money that's not going to the lottery, or any portion that's not going to the lottery, that's also money that's not going into education. It's a more complex formula, but there's probably more education money out there that's being lost through that, and some of the existing education money could either go back to education or go to some of the other initiatives that you're interested in. In the past, they operated usually in big houses just across state lines, big gambling halls. Now they're just everywhere, in the open and in these back rooms.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions. We certainly appreciate you coming today and bringing the information that you have, answering questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have one more agency, and that's workers' comp. I see Judge Hall here. We're running about 15 minutes behind, 20 minutes behind. I apologize. I've just never, it's our fourth year doing this.
Move this down. The revenue commissioner's a lot taller.
Never have been able to figure out exactly how much time to allot. And I always want to make sure that, people have their questions answered. They have the opportunity to ask questions. I appreciate every one of you. I really do appreciate the questions you asked. They're all good questions. And Representative House, I thought that was a very, very good question you asked about, and the point you were making about it's hard to make an argument for raising taxes or bringing in more when we're not collecting the taxes that are out there and people are not paying the taxes they should pay. I appreciate that. Very well said. Thank you. We do have Judge Hall here.
Right. It's good to see you again. I didn't expect to see you again so soon, but I appreciate your time as well.
Well, we know that in your agency there was an item that's been changed, and I think you made a point when you were here before that was something that was important to you. We just want to give you the opportunity, if you wanted to talk about that and give the members an opportunity to ask you about it.
Okay. Yeah, it would be on. It's on page 38. Is that right?
That's correct. And
it's the item 48.1.5 I think you're mentioning, and really it has an interplay with 48.1.1. I know we've talked about this a lot, how the board is not funded at all by tax revenues, that we are funded solely on our assessment on the insurance carriers and the self-insured employers. Y'all set the budget, and then we assess 832 companies. We bring the money in, it goes into Treasury, and then we draw it down. But as you also heard Trey Childress and others talk, the governor and OPB have worked to kind of do an across-the-board for all agencies, and we are an executive branch agency, to look for what would be shown as a reduction. Really the only in the initial budget, we did have a reduction in our line item of payment to state treasury of $345,000, and that money, $331,000, which is the line item for our system maintenance, came from that change. Those of you who've been on the committee for a longer time, I think when I first, back in 2003, we began work on a technology project, an integrated claims management system. It was a $3.5 million project. We entered into a contract which ends June 30, 2008. Part of that overall $3.5 million contract for the last 5 years has provided for the system, ICMS system maintenance and software maintenance and emergency help in case the system goes down, because once you go to a totally electronic system, you need to make sure it's up and running well with high availability for our state customers and stakeholders. But when they were looking for cuts, this is kind of, we don't have, other than our other programs, most of our budget is personnel, salaries, and rent. So as far as was there another place we could cut, there really was not. And we have talked with Governor's Office and OPB, and they recognize that this will be a required ongoing expense, and they have worked with us this fiscal year and have assured us they will for the next, and I have every confidence they will, because one of the things that we have been able to do, and I think it was this committee that first spoke to me about it when I first came to you, is to allow agencies to move money within the same program without requiring legislative change. So they can work with us, they said, over the next year to move money within programs from the payment to Treasury program to allow us to meet our needs on the maintenance for especially the custom software part. The system, we've got a great value. You've heard a lot of different estimates for systems, and this system is a totally electronic workflow. It allows web filing by insurance carriers and other users of our system who are parties to our claims. And it allows for the insurance carriers to do batch downloads. It makes their business much more efficient, saves them money. And they're the ones we assess to pay for the system, so they're happy. They're happy to pay for it because they certainly want it. But I feel confident that we can work it out within the programs. The other option would be, to come back with the amended budget and, to talk to our constituents who we assess. That was done in 2004's downturn. We added $400,000 to our payment to Treasury item, and that was approved, and we were able to use our other funds for our operations.
Okay, well, thank you. In fact, I will credit Ms. Fleischman here to kind of bring that to my attention.
Yes, she has done a great job. She's great to work with, and she really, y'all have a great person because she really works to understand it. She was new, and she caught on very quickly because our funding formula is it's very counterintuitive because when you cut the workers' comp board budget, and this will show a cut that goes from 18 million down to 17.
Okay.
If you know that, then what we'll do instead of assessing 18 million on most of these are out-of-state insurance companies to bring into Georgia, we'll now only assess the 17 whatever. So.
Okay. Well, I'm just concerned that this was for maintenance and software and hardware support for something that's already in existence.
Right.
So
we've already spent $3.5 billion. We've got to support it,
right.
And it will need to be, and hopefully we can get it more time. I know everybody's short of time this year to work it out because it needs to be shown really as a continuation item because it will be there an expense for the state and the board for the state board for
okay.
and as long as it exists.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. I just want to give you an opportunity
And
if you wanted to come
I appreciate
in
and working with all of you.
Talk to us about that. Are there any questions? I don't see any. Thank you for being
Okay.
patient and waiting for a while for us to get to you. Thank you very much.
That's all right. We always learn a lot here. So
Thank you. Let's see. I guess that's it. All right. With that, this meeting, unless the member has something to bring to the subcommittee, this meeting is adjourned.